The previous video talked about the controls you use to design colour gradients, and in this one we'll take a look at the rest of the controls on the designer page. For example, this is how you rename a layer. To add a new layer, you tap the plus button above the list of layers and the new layer is given a default name. Let's colour the new layer blue and name it blue. As you can see, blue is being rendered in front of red. The layer at the bottom of the list is rendered first, and then higher layers are rendered on top or in front as we're looking at them. With blue selected, I can tap send behind to send it back one layer. So now blue's been rendered first and red's been rendered on top or in front. And I can tap bring in front to bring the selected layer forward a layer. You can imagine that you're sitting where that plus button is and you're looking down through the layers. So remember this third column, all the controls apply to the selected layer, and you use the list of layers to make a selection. So if I select red, all these controls apply to that. So I can move that right and down, and I can select blue and move it, let's say, left and up, for example, and you'll see the selection adorno is moving with the layer, and that helps us see where the layer is. It helps us see which layer is selected. But if I need to, I can turn the selection adorno off to get a clearer view. I can turn it back on. Sometimes you want to just view a layer in isolation. Sometimes that makes it easier to work with, and you can use this control to hide all of them except the selected one. So we're only seeing the selected layer in this mode. Another control to think about is the opacity mask curve. So let's talk about what an opacity mask is in this case. The planet here is actually stored in a square texture, and that is masked off by a radial opacity gradient. To kind of get a clearer idea of what effect that opacity mask is having, let's take a look at a hypothetical version of Gravviti where the opacity mask isn't applied. And this is how this particular design would look. The colour cuts off sharply at the square edges of the texture for any layer that's not perfectly centered, and that doesn't look very planet-like. So now let's kind of turn the opacity mask back on by switching back to the real version of Gravviti. Applying the opacity mask to the texture makes it circular, and planets and stars are spheres, but a sphere looks like a circle no matter what angle you look at it from. So the mask helps your designs look like planets and stars. Now the opacity mask curve control works a little bit like the opacity curve that you can apply to an individual layer, except that the opacity slider for the center and edge colors lets you control how much transparency there is at the center and how much at the edge. But the opacity mask is always fully opaque at the center and fully transparent at the edge, and it applies to the whole planet, not just to a layer. And by varying the curve, you can make your whole planet look as skinny or as fat as you want it to. You can add up to 4 layers to each planet with the plus button above the list of layers. And to delete a layer, select it and tap the bin button above the list of layers. If you tap it by mistake, you can tap anywhere to dismiss the confirmation pop-up. Otherwise, tap delete. And that goes ahead with the deletion. So now we've talked about all the controls in the second column, with the exception of psychedelic shenanigans, which probably sounds a bit funny to you. I won't talk in any great detail about that now, but I'll just say that it has to do with certain effects that you can get that don't look anything like stars and planets. they look more like abstract, kaleidoscopic, psychedelic patterns. It's kind of unlikely that you'll run into them anytime soon, but you might. And if you start seeing anything particularly weird, then what you can do is try toggling this control off and on and just see which outcome you prefer. It's just another control for you to play with. Now, this is your list of planets and stars, and you can have anywhere from 1 to 16 planets and stars. And just again, like with layers, you just tap plus to add a new one, and it gets a default name. And of course, I can rename any planet and star. Let's call this one red versus blue. And delete works the same way as for layers as well. Let's delete that one that we just added. So we've talked about these two controls already, and let's talk about resolution now. So resolution controls the number of pixels in the texture that we use to display the planet or star. So it's set at 128 pixels square right now. I can alter that. With this design, it's not obvious what's happening, although it does look different at really low resolutions. If you start running into any psychedelic shenanigans, that is when you'll really see some really interesting differences as you vary resolution. But for a kind of smooth kind of gradient that you're seeing here, it doesn't. It's not particularly dramatic. But if we turn the pixelated toggle on, then resolution really does make a big difference to just about any design. As we lower it, you start to get this kind of really pixelated effect, and it gets extreme at really low values. Kind of makes me think of 8-bit games or Minecraft or something like that. And you can play with the other controls then and just see what effect that has on super low resolution designs that you've got. Just kind of experiment and just play around. This is a really kind of retro looking effect.